Welcome to SchiZophia. I'm Calm, a fractured mind exploring philosophy, science, mythology, mysticism, psychology, and consciousness. Let's begin. There's something about rhythm that bypasses understanding entirely. Before you know what music is, before you have language for it, your body responds. A beat drops and something in you moves toward it. Not because you decided to, but because the response is older than decision, and that's worth pausing on. Of all the things a nervous system could be wired to respond to, rhythm is one of the most consistent and most immediate. Not just in humans, across mammals, across species with vastly different evolutionary histories, the response to rhythmic pattern is hardwired rather than learned. Why? What is rhythm doing that makes it worth that level of biological investment? That question is what this video is about. And the answer, I want to suggest, goes deeper than music or movement or even biology. It goes all the way down to what time actually is. Not a container that existence happens inside, but something closer to existence's own pulse. The rhythm that isn't a feature of reality, but the structure of it. Some of what I'll cover here is established neuroscience and evolutionary biology. Some of it is philosophical speculation that I'll try to flag clearly as we go. The distinction matters, and I think the idea is interesting enough to hold without needing to overclaim for it. In the 1970s, the neuroscientist Jacques Panksepp did something straightforward and revelatory. He mapped the primary emotional systems of the mammalian brain, not the complex social emotions that develop through experience, but the hardwired circuits present across species. He identified 7. One of them was play, and it's important to distinguish this as a primary system rather than a learned behavior. This matters because it changes what play is. Play isn't what animals do when they have nothing more important to do. It's not a luxury behavior that appears when survival needs are met. It's a dedicated neural circuit present in rats and dogs and humans and most mammals we've studied that generates a specific drive toward a specific kind of interaction. Voluntary, structured, involving other agents with its own distinct neurochemical signature. Rats, given the opportunity to play, emit ultrasonic chirps in a frequency range that maps onto what we'd call laughter in humans. They seek out play opportunities. They have play preferences. When deprived of play, they show behavioral deficits that persist into adulthood. The circuit isn't decorative, but here's what's philosophically interesting about what the play circuit actually produces. Play consistently generates behavior that exceeds immediate necessity. Young wolves play fight long after they've learned the basic motor patterns the fighting requires. Young humans play social games that are far more complex than anything their current social situation demands. The play doesn't stop when the immediate skill is acquired. It keeps going, keeps elaborating, keeps generating capacity beyond what's currently needed. This excess is the key. Play is the biological mechanism by which living systems invest in future interaction capacity rather than just current survival. It's a kind of structural generosity, resources spent not on what's needed now but on what might be needed later. In situations the organism hasn't yet encountered and can't yet specify. That's worth holding as we move forward. Play as excess beyond immediate necessity, as investment in unspecified future capacity, as something a nervous system does not because it has to, but because the capacity to do more than is currently required turns out to be worth building. Evolutionary game theory starts with a deceptively simple question. If evolution selects for individual survival and reproduction, why does cooperation exist at all? Why don't organisms simply defect? Take what they can, give nothing back. Since defection seems to offer the highest individual payoff? The answer, worked out mathematically by John Maynard Smith and others from the 1970s onward, is that the payoff of any strategy depends on what everyone else is doing. This is the core insight that separates evolutionary game theory from classical economics. There's no universally optimal strategy, only strategies that are stable or unstable relative to the population they're operating in. The hawk-dove dynamic is the clearest example. Hawks always escalate conflict. Doves always retreat. In a population of all doves, a single hawk does extremely well. It wins every contest without opposition. But as hawks increase, they start meeting each other and escalating conflicts become costly. Eventually, the population stabilizes at a mixture of hawks and doves where neither strategy can improve its payoff by switching. Not because anyone planned it, not because a central authority enforced it, but because the repeated interactions of many agents following simple rules produce a stable equilibrium as an emergent property of the system. This is philosophically significant for several reasons worth being precise about. First, order without design. The stable strategy mix isn't imposed from outside. It emerges from the interaction dynamics themselves. The system finds its own equilibrium through repeated play, the way a physical system finds its lowest energy state not by being placed there but by settling through its own dynamics. Second, the importance of repetition. Single interactions produce different outcomes than repeated ones. In a one-shot prisoner's dilemma, defection is the rational choice. In repeated interactions, cooperation becomes stable because defectors can be identified and excluded. Time, the repetition of interaction across many rounds, is what makes cooperation possible. Without the temporal dimension, without the rhythm of repeated encounter, the cooperative equilibria that make complex social life possible simply don't emerge. Third, and this is where I want to be careful about what I'm claiming, the same dynamic appears at biological scales we don't usually think of as strategic. The stable ratios of molecular interactions in cellular chemistry, the equilibrium distributions of species in ecosystems, the self-organizing criticality of neural networks. These all exhibit the same basic structure. Repeated interactions between simple agents producing stable patterns that weren't designed by any of them. Whether this reflects genuine scale invariance, the same game-theoretic dynamic operating from molecular to cosmic scales, or simply a family resemblance between systems that happen to share some structural features, I want to hold honestly as an open question. The correspondence is real and worth taking seriously. The claim that it reflects a single underlying principle requires more than the correspondence alone to establish. What I'm confident about is the temporal dimension. Evolutionary game theory makes visible something that's easy to miss. Stable, cooperative, complex structure requires time. Not just duration, but the specific temporal structure of repeated interaction, with rhythm between encounters. The pause between rounds isn't downtime. It's what makes the next round meaningful. There's a common misconception about music that's worth correcting before we go further. Silence isn't the absence of music, it's a constitutive part of what music is. A rest in a musical score isn't a gap where nothing happens, it's an event, notated, deliberate, as carefully placed as any note. Composers know this intimately. The pause before a resolution carries as much tension as the notes surrounding it. Remove the rests and you don't have more music. You have noise. The silence is what makes the sound meaningful by giving it boundaries, by creating the expectation that something will follow. Rhythm, precisely defined, is the structured relationship between sound and silence, not sound alone. The beat exists because of what isn't there as much as what is. This seems like an observation about music. I want to suggest it's an observation about structure in general. Consider sleep. We tend to think of sleep as a biological necessity. something evolution would eliminate if it could, a vulnerability that persists because the metabolic costs of staying awake continuously are too high. But the evidence doesn't fully support that framing. Sleep deprivation produces psychosis in humans remarkably quickly. Within days, sometimes less. Not just fatigue, not just impaired performance, but genuine breaks in the structure of experience. Hallucinations, paranoia, the dissolution of the boundary between internal and external. That's a striking finding. The mind doesn't just slow down without sleep. It loses coherence, which suggests sleep isn't just rest in the sense of reduced activity. It's doing something structurally necessary that wakefulness can't do. The current best understanding involves memory consolidation, neural pruning, the clearing of metabolic waste products from the brain. But underneath all of that is something simpler. The mind requires periodic withdrawal from engagement to maintain its own coherence. A self-referential system, a loop in the framework we've been building, can't process itself while simultaneously processing everything else. It needs intervals of reduced external input to fold back on its own structure, integrate what's accumulated, release what doesn't need carrying forward. The silence is when the system catches up with itself. This scales. Ecosystems have seasons, periods of growth and periods of dormancy that aren't failures of productivity but structural requirements of the system's long-term coherence. Economies have cycles that, however painful, may reflect genuine rhythmic requirements of complex adaptive systems rather than just policy failures. Relationships have rhythms of closeness and distance that, when respected, sustain depth that continuous engagement erodes. The pattern is consistent enough across scales to take seriously as a structural observation rather than just an analogy. Complex self-referential systems require rhythm. The structured alternation of engagement and withdrawal, sound and silence, activity and rest. Not because rest is pleasant, but because the silence is constitutive. It's part of what the system is, not a pause in what the system does. Everything we've covered so far, play as excess beyond immediate necessity, evolutionary game theory's dependence on repeated temporal interaction, silence as structurally constitutive rather than merely restful, points toward a single philosophical move worth making carefully. What if time isn't the container existence happens inside? What if time is existence's own rhythm? Let me be precise about what that distinction means because it's easy to nod at and hard to actually hold. The standard picture treats time as a kind of stage, a dimension along which events are arranged, a background against which things happen. Time is what you measure with clocks. It's the axis on the graph. Existence unfolds inside it the way a play unfolds on a stage. The stage isn't part of the play, it's what the play happens on. The philosopher Edmund Husserl spent years arguing that this picture gets something fundamentally wrong. Time as we actually experience it, lived temporality as he called it, isn't a dimension we move through. It's the structure of experience itself. Every moment of conscious experience has a trailing edge. What he called retention. The just past still present as echo, and a leading edge, protension, the about to happen already shaping now. Experience isn't a point moving along a timeline. It's a small duration with thickness, always already structured by what just was and what's about to be. Remove that temporal structure and you don't have timeless experience. You have no experience at all. Time consciousness isn't something that happens inside experience. It's what makes experience possible. The rhythm of retention and protension, the pulse of just was and about to be, is the basic heartbeat of conscious life. That's a phenomenological claim, a claim about the structure of experience from the inside. Now here's where I want to apply the scale invariance hypothesis carefully and honestly. because this is genuinely speculative territory. If the same structural principle repeats across scales, which we've been treating as a serious hypothesis rather than established fact, then the rhythmic temporal structure Husserl identified in consciousness may not be unique to conscious experience. It may be the local expression of something operating at every scale of reality. At the quantum level, the uncertainty principle establishes a fundamental rhythmic relationship between energy and time. The more precisely you specify one, the less precisely the other can be known. This isn't just a measurement limitation. It's a structural feature of quantum systems suggesting that time at the quantum level isn't a smooth background, but has its own granular rhythmic character. At the cosmic level, the universe itself exhibits large-scale rhythmic structure. The oscillation between expansion and the gravitational pull toward contraction. The cycling of matter through stellar formation and dispersal. The periodic structure of the cosmic microwave background. Whether these constitute genuine cosmic rhythm in the sense we've been developing or simply the statistical behavior of matter under physical laws is an honest question I can't answer definitively. What I'm more confident about is the human scale, where the evidence is richest and most direct. The rhythmic structure of biological life. Circadian rhythms entrained to planetary rotation, ultradian rhythms cycling through the day, the seasonal rhythms of longer biological cycles. These aren't arbitrary. They're the organism synchronizing its internal temporal structure with the rhythmic structure of its environment. The organism and the cosmos keeping time together. And play, in this context, is what happens when a system engages with rhythm freely, rather than under compulsion. The child who keeps dancing after the music stops isn't being irrational. They're extending the rhythm into silence, feeling its structure in the absence of the sound that produced it. That's what play does. It internalizes the rhythm of existence and then elaborates it, exceeds it, generates new rhythmic possibility from what it has internalized. If time is existence's rhythm rather than its container, then play isn't just a biological phenomenon. It's the local expression of something the universe does at every scale. The free elaboration of rhythmic structure beyond immediate necessity. The generation of capacity for encounters that haven't happened yet. That's speculative. I want to be honest about that. But it's a speculation that follows from taking the evidence we've covered seriously rather than stopping at the scale where the evidence is most comfortable. Let me bring this back to something immediate. You already know what it feels like when you're in rhythm with something. A conversation that flows without effort. A period of work where everything connects. A relationship that has found its natural pace. And you know what it feels like when you're out of rhythm. Forcing engagement when withdrawal is needed, resting when the moment calls for movement, pushing against a timing that isn't yours. That felt sense of being in or out of rhythm isn't subjective noise. It's information, the organism reporting on its relationship to the temporal structure it's embedded in. What I've tried to show in this video is that rhythm isn't a feature of music or biology that we happen to find pleasant. It's a structural principle that appears at every scale we've examined honestly, from the hardwired play circuits of mammalian brains to the temporal dependence of cooperative equilibria in evolutionary game theory, to the constitutive role of silence in making sound meaningful, to the rhythmic structure of conscious experience itself, whether that reflects genuine scale invariance, the same principle operating from quantum to cosmic scales, I want to hold carefully as a hypothesis rather than a conclusion. The evidence at the human scale is strong. The extrapolation upward is speculative, and I think it's worth being honest about that rather than letting the elegance of the idea do work that evidence hasn't done. What I'm confident about is this. Time isn't the stage existence performs on. It's closer to the pulse existence has. The rhythm of engagement and withdrawal, sound and silence, play and rest that makes coherent structure possible at every scale we've examined. And if that's right, then living well has something to do with finding that rhythm rather than overriding it. Not as a spiritual prescription, as a structural observation. The silence isn't wasted time, the rest isn't failure. The withdrawal is part of what the loop is. And that's where we'll rest for today. Thank you for spending this time here. Genuinely. This channel is my way of building something real, on my own terms. If something here resonated with you, if it made you think or see something differently, pass it on. Share it, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.